On a tranquil evening at a diner steeped in unvoiced bias, a middle-aged black man in modest attire enters. He instantly perceives the apathy, the subtle neglect from the personnel. In this place, the experience transcends mere sustenance. It revolves around the aesthetics. However, there is one exception. A black waitress, the sole individual who extends to him the same level of care and respect afforded to any other patron. Unbeknownst to her, the compassion she showed that evening will alter the course of her existence for all time. The morning sun poured in, casting long golden streaks through the windows of Harbor's Diner, illuminating the worn-out booths and scratched tables with a warmth that seemed to elude the patrons within. Janelle Carter, 32, stood behind the counter, methodically wiping down the surface with a damp rag. Her hands moved instinctively, while her thoughts drifted, burdened by the looming reality of yet another 12-hour shift. The diner was a cozy spot, nestled in a serene corner of Memphis, Tennessee, a haven for truckers seeking a cup of coffee, where seasoned patrons savored their newspapers, and the staff recognized your usual order even before learning your name. It lacked elegance, yet it was dependable, and for 3 years it had served as Janelle's essential support. She had never envisioned staying here for this duration. The position began as a short-term fix, merely a way to manage expenses while she contemplated her next steps. However, life had intervened. The weight of her mother's medical bills, the burden of Micah's tuition, and the silent obligation of being the glue that kept it all intact. Thus, she chose to remain. She had endured double shifts, faced impolite customers, brushed off the patronizing looks from her colleagues, and convinced herself that staying under the radar was the wise choice. That was the way to endure. Yet, there were images that lingered in her mind, haunting her thoughts. The manner in which specific customers were handled. A sharply dressed businessman receives warm smiles and engaging conversation, while a working-class man in paint-stained overalls is met with hurried service. Those who appeared unlikely to leave a generous tip seemed to fade into the background for the staff. And if you dared to voice your thoughts, you were labeled the issue. Janelle had discovered that through experience. Once, she had slipped up with a casual comment about how the table had been kept waiting too long, all while Heather Lawson, the senior waitress, leaned against the counter, absorbed in her phone. Heather regarded her with a frosty smirk and remarked, "You don't earn extra for playing the saint, Janelle." That was the silent guideline in this place. You either accepted it or you mastered the art of silence. Janelle had opted for the latter. Until this evening. The Tuesday evening unfolded at a leisurely pace, the dinner rush a distant memory, as the diner embraced a soothing tranquility. Janelle stood at the counter, diligently refilling the sugar dispensers, when the bell above the door chimed softly. She looked up, anticipating the sight of yet another familiar face, perhaps one of the truck drivers, or one of the elderly gentlemen who enjoyed occupying a seat at the counter, grumbling about the headlines. Yet, the figure who entered was unknown. He appeared to be in his late 50s, his hair a mix of salt and pepper, and his sharp eyes scanned the diner with a calm, assured demeanor. His attire was tidy yet somewhat frayed, lacking any ostentation, merely a straightforward button-up paired with slacks. Yet, there was an intriguing quality to the way he lingered just within the threshold, surveying the space before making his move. Janelle was familiar with that expression. She had encountered it previously, particularly in clients who were already aware of the kind of reception they were, or weren't, about to receive. Without a doubt, the reply came right away. Heather, propped against the counter, remained absorbed in her phone, not sparing a single look upward. Eric Brooks, a member of the kitchen team, glanced at the man, their eyes meeting for just a fleeting moment, before he returned to his playful banter with Tucker Williams, the shift manager. No salutation. Welcome to Harbor's Diner. Only quietude. Janelle sensed its heaviness, dense and unsettling. This was no mere coincidence. Her colleagues had reached a decision. For a moment, she contemplated following her usual instinct, maintaining a low profile, avoiding involvement. It would be simpler. It has always been that way. Yet again, her gaze fell upon the man, observing his stance, poised and patient, as if he were offering them an opportunity to challenge his expectations. Only this time, Janelle also made a decision. With a swift motion, she cleaned her hands on a napkin, picked up a menu, and confidently approached. "Good evening, sir," she remarked, her tone friendly yet relaxed. "Only you tonight?" The man locked eyes with her, and a subtle warmth flickered in his expression. "Indeed, ma'am," he replied, his tone unwavering. Janelle beamed and motioned toward a vacant booth by the window. "Come along with me. Is the booth satisfactory?" "Absolutely acceptable." She presented him with the menu, retrieving a pen from behind her ear. "Would you like something to drink to begin with?" "Coffee," he remarked. "Dark. On its way shortly." With swift precision, she seized a new pot and filled his cup with her own hands. She sensed Heather's gaze upon her, aware of Eric and Tucker's scrutiny as well, yet she remained steadfastly facing forward. She placed the coffee before him, and he surveyed the restaurant briefly before returning his gaze to her. "Are you the only one on duty tonight?" His voice dropped to a whisper, meant solely for her ears. Janelle understood his implication. She cast a glance at the others, noticing Heather leaning in to whisper something to Tucker, both of them struggling to suppress their smirks. She let out a breath, casting the man a glance that spoke volumes. Can certainly seem that way at times. That brought a smile to his face. He opened the menu, his eyes darting over the choices. "What's the best option available?" Janelle inclined her head, pondering. "It really hinges on your current inclination. If you're in the mood for something hearty, the pot roast is prepared fresh. But for my top pick, the grilled salmon is the way to indulge." He arched an eyebrow. "Indeed, that is the case." She gave a slight nod. "I assure you, you will not look back with regret." He offered a smile, modest yet sincere. "It shall be salmon." Janelle carefully noted it. Excellent selection. As she strolled back to the kitchen, she caught Heather's words, murmured just loud enough to reach her ears. "She's squandering her time." Janelle tightened her jaw yet continued on her path. As she placed the order and returned with a steaming coffee refill, a palpable change in the atmosphere enveloped her. It was understated, yet undeniably present. Heather's eyes narrowed, while Tucker's furtive glances toward the booth suggested he was anticipating Janelle's misstep or an ill-timed comment. Even Raymond Sloan, the general manager of the diner, had briefly emerged from his office, surveying the room before retreating once more. Janelle felt a heavy weight settle in her chest, an unsettling awareness that she had just marked herself as a target. Yet, she remained unaware of the severity of the situation until the dawn of the following day. Janelle hardly found rest that night. The way Heather had whispered under her breath, the smirk on Tucker's face, and Raymond's brief glance from his office, all combined to create an unsettling feeling within her. Yet, she reassured herself that she was merely overanalyzing the situation. She was innocent of any wrongdoing. In every sense, she fulfilled her role perfectly, attending to the needs of a customer as any dedicated server would. What was it that made her stomach churn with apprehension as she drove into the parking lot of the Harbor's diner the following morning? The air held a refreshing chill, the sun just starting to rise above the rooftops, as she picked up her apron from the passenger seat and draped it over her shoulder. A few vehicles occupied the lot, with Raymond's silver sedan positioned neatly by the entrance, while Tucker's weathered truck sat alongside it. Janelle entered, anticipating the familiar scene. Heather casually leaning against the counter, absorbed in her phone, Tucker exchanging playful banter with Eric by the coffee machine, while the kitchen team busily prepared for the morning shift. Yet, there was an unsettling feeling in the air. Heather was absent from the counter, Tucker was not brewing coffee, and Eric was devoid of laughter. Rather, they were observing her. Heather stood with her arms crossed, a self-satisfied smirk playing at the corner of her mouth. Tucker stood with his hands buried deep in his pockets, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, as if he were savoring a secret amusement. Even Eric, typically indifferent to theatrics, had paused his table wiping to gaze at her. Janelle's fingers clenched around her apron. Suddenly, a door let out a haunting creak as it swung open. She pivoted at the perfect moment to catch a glimpse of Raymond emerging from his office. His face a mask of inscrutability, his stance tense and unyielding. He gazed at her as if he had been anticipating her arrival the moment she stepped through that door. "Janelle," he stated with an unwavering tone, "accompany me." A chill pooled in her stomach. She threw a final look at Heather and Tucker, who remained smirking. At that moment, she realized this was more than just a routine morning meeting. This was truly remarkable. With a deep breath, she straightened her posture and entered Raymond's office. The room felt confined, with a chaotic desk strewn with disorganized papers, remnants of coffee spills, and a partially consumed donut. Yet Janelle's gaze was not on the chaos. Her gaze was fixed on Raymond. He failed to provide her with a seat. He bypassed the trivialities of small talk. Instead, he reclined in his chair, exhaled slowly, and stated, "We're letting you go." The words struck with a sharp intensity. Janelle blinked, her thoughts racing to comprehend the words that had just reached her ears. What is happening? Janelle's heart raced in her chest, her thoughts swirling as she gazed at Raymond, wishing, yearning, that she had misunderstood. Yet his demeanor stayed cold, indifferent, as if he had already left the discussion behind. "We have decided to part ways." The words struck her with the force of a punch to the stomach. Her throat felt parched. "Beg your pardon?" Raymond remained utterly unfazed. "Is not coming together as planned." A quick, humorless chuckle escaped Janelle's lips. "Not going as planned? I have spent 3 years in this place. I have always been punctual, never once missing a shift." Raymond let out a breath, interrupting her with a subtle shake of his head. "We've come to a conclusion." Janelle felt a knot in her stomach. This wasn't related to her performance. This pertains to last night, concerning the act of serving the incorrect individual. Heather and Tucker had anticipated this moment, and Raymond had allowed it to unfold. She willed herself to maintain her composure, despite the rapid beating of her heart echoing in her ears. "Raymond, please," she said, her tone calm and deliberate. "This position is essential for me. I assist my mother with the rent, and my brother is currently attending school." His expression was unreadable. "I apologize." Janelle sensed the humiliation wash over her, searing her from within. Asking for help had never suited her. Yet this moment transcended mere pride. This was a matter of enduring against all odds. "I'll keep my head down," she said, striving to mask the urgency in her tone. "I shall remain silent. Could you kindly consider it?" Heather's self-satisfied chuckle resonated from behind her. Janelle felt a constriction in her chest. Raymond inclined his body forward, his elbows finding a perch on the desk. His tone lightened slightly, evoking a semblance of compassion, yet lacking the sincerity to truly convey it. "It simply doesn't align well anymore." Janelle's fingers clenched tightly, pressing into her palms. That was the end. Without a hint of caution. No elaboration needed. There are no opportunities for a do-over. Freshly released. Her breath was sharp and uneven, hands trembling as she carefully untied her apron, placing it on the chair beside her. She took a deep breath, battling the tightness in her throat as she turned to walk away. Yet, at the threshold, she paused, compelling herself to glance back at him for one final moment. This situation clearly isn't correct. Raymond remained unresponsive. He merely cast his eyes back to the paperwork, as if she had vanished from reality. Janelle sighed and swung the door open. The moment she emerged, every gaze was fixed upon her. Heather remained propped against the counter, arms folded, her smirk growing at the sight of Janelle's bare hands. Tucker showed no sign of feigned astonishment. Eric emitted a soft whistle. He muttered with a shake of his head, as if he were relishing the spectacle before him. Janelle's cheeks flushed with heat, yet she steadfastly held her composure, determined not to reveal her vulnerability. With determination, she squared her shoulders, lifted her chin, and strode past them in silence, pushing the door open and stepping into the refreshing morning air. After 3 long years, she found herself without a job for the first time. There is no paycheck. There is no contingency in place. She approached her car, her fingers clumsily working as she pulled the door open and settled into the driver's seat. Her breath was quick and jagged, her hands clutching the steering wheel with such intensity that her knuckles blanched to a ghostly white. What comes next? Her rent was due next week. Micah had just texted her last night about needing money for textbooks. Her mother had a doctor's appointment in 2 days. Janelle squeezed her eyes shut, forcing down the wave of panic clawing up her throat. A shadow moved in front of her windshield. At first she thought it was just a passing pedestrian, but when she glanced up, her stomach dropped. Someone was standing just outside the diner, watching her. The door to Harbor's diner creaked open and a figure stepped inside. Janelle's breath caught. Dorian Cole. She barely had time to process it before she heard the low murmur of voices from inside. Then silence. The diner had gone completely still. Janelle slowly turned her head, watching through the glass as all the color drained from Heather's face. Tucker's smirk disappeared in a heartbeat. Eric's mouth parted just a bit, his brows knitting together in bewilderment. And then, Raymond emerged from his office, coming to an abrupt halt. Janelle sat in her spot, unable to catch a glimpse of Dorian's expression, yet she felt no need to. She sensed the change in the atmosphere, the tension palpable, humming through the windows. At last, Dorian found his voice. Serene, consistent, unyielding. She isn't the one facing termination. Janelle felt a constriction in her chest. Raymond's jaw quivered slightly. What did you say? Dorian advanced another step, measured and intentional. Heather's eyes widened in disbelief, her lashes fluttering as if trying to process the astonishing sight before her. Hold on, this has to be a prank, doesn't it? She hesitated, releasing a shaky chuckle. You're the person from last night. The observing voice fell silent. At that instant, Dorian retrieved a business card from his pocket and placed it on the counter. Janelle strained to discern the striking letters emblazoned upon it. Dorian Cole, the owner of Harbor's Diner, stood in the midst of a stunned silence that enveloped the room. Dorian's lips twisted into an expression that resembled a smile, yet held an enigmatic quality. Indeed, he replied with calm assurance. I was the person from last night. He shifted his focus to Raymond. This place is mine. Janelle sensed the shock sweep across the room, a tide of understanding engulfing everyone present. Tucker's complexion had taken on a slightly lighter hue. Eric hesitated, taking a cautious step backward. Heather appeared as though she had just ingested shards of glass. Yet it was Raymond who stood to lose the most. Janelle had never witnessed him at a loss for words before. At that moment he appeared utterly at a loss for words. Dorian allowed the silence to linger, just enough to make them uneasy, before he finally tilted his head slightly. You have just let go of one of my top team members. Heather gulped. Hold on, Dorian interrupted her. Preserve it. I've reached my limit of what I can take in. His expression grew steely. Tucker, Heather, Eric. He allowed their names to linger in the atmosphere for a moment. Raymond. Raymond ultimately discovered his unique expression. Mr. Cole, I believe it's important for us to be aware, Dorian stated with a pointed tone. Your voice is not welcome here. Raymond's lips clamped together. Dorian's gaze roamed the room. Everyone is dismissed. In effect right away. Heather emitted a choked noise, a blend of astonishment and alarm. Hold on, you can't be serious, I am, Dorian stated, his voice devoid of emotion. Gather your belongings. Leave now. No one stirred. Silence enveloped the room. Janelle found herself gasping for air. Dorian at last shifted his gaze in her direction. His voice took on a gentle quality. Janelle. She locked eyes with him, still grappling with the unfolding events. If you'll have it, he said, I'd like you to be the new manager. Janelle blinked. The room whirled for a moment. This morning, she stepped out of Harbor's Diner empty-handed. At this moment, she was on the verge of stepping back in as their superior. Janelle's heart raced intensely, a palpable thrum echoing in her throat. The diner was enveloped in an oppressive silence, the sort that arises when a sudden shift in power leaves the defeated momentarily paralyzed, unable to respond. She remained rooted in place, her fingers clutching the strap of her bag with such intensity that her knuckles throbbed, struggling to comprehend the events that had just unfolded. In one fleeting moment, she found herself cast aside as if she held no value at all. In the following moment, she found herself being presented with the exact role of the man who had belittled her. She caught a glimpse of Raymond's expression, noticed how his lips formed a tight, colorless line. His jaw muscles tightened as he struggled to maintain his composure. Yet his eyes betrayed him. He was utterly astounded. He was seething with rage. Helpless. Heather's mouth hung agape. Her smirk vanished, overtaken by pure astonishment. Tucker's expression transformed from amusement to dread, as if he was finally coming to the unsettling realization that this was no mere joke or misunderstanding. This was genuine. Dorian was being completely sincere. And Eric truly had the audacity to chuckle softly. A sharp, incredulous sound as he rubbed his hand across his face, as if he were torn between finding this amusing or utterly terrifying. Janelle swallowed hard, her voice a mere whisper, almost lost in the air. "So, you want me to take on the role of manager?" Dorian gave a single, resolute nod. "I certainly do." She let out a quick breath, her head shaking in disbelief. "But I just don't even." "There's no need for that," Dorian interjected. "I have observed all that is necessary." His eyes darted to the others, his demeanor icy. "I observed your interactions with customers. I observed those who truly fulfilled their responsibilities and those who lingered, waiting for others to compensate for their shortcomings. I observed the culture of this place, and to be straightforward, I wasn't fond of what I encountered." His voice lowered a notch, each word cutting through the air with precision. "That comes to a close today." Raymond abruptly broke free from his dazed silence, his hands crashing against the counter as he leaned in, his expression contorted with fury. "This isn't something you can accomplish." Dorian hardly cast a glance in his direction. "I have already completed that." "You have no idea what it requires to manage a place like this," Raymond insisted, his voice tinged with urgency. "She is unaware. You really believe she can just stroll in here and—" "She's been managing this place more effectively than you for years," Dorian interjected, his tone calm and even. The sole distinction was that she lacked the designation. Heather emitted a muffled sound from deep within, her hands balling into tight fists. "Are you really going to substitute all of us with her?" She let out a sharp hiss. "What for?" "Because she handed you a steaming cup of coffee." "No," Dorian said, his voice lowering to a menacing calm. "Because she was the only one in this building who showed me respect before she knew my true identity." Heather's cheeks burned with a deep crimson hue. "Are you looking to continue this debate?" Dorian inquired, arching an eyebrow. "Or would you prefer to depart with the remnants of your dignity intact?" Heather stammered, yet she was aware. Everyone did. This was inevitable. For the first time, Tucker appeared to discover his voice. He moistened his lips, stealing a look at Raymond before shifting his gaze back to Dorian. "Me, you're quite earnest about this." His voice trembled just a bit, as if he still believed there was a possibility he could charm his way out of the situation. Dorian inclined his head. "I avoid redundancy." Tucker's spirit sank immediately as he turned to Raymond, seeking some form of direction, yet Raymond had shifted his gaze away. He fixed his gaze on Janelle, his expression tense, his eyes shadowed by an emotion that resembled hatred. Janelle sensed the intensity of his gaze, yet she stood her ground unwaveringly. Raymond let out a breath through his nose, then dug into his pocket, pulling out a keyring with a swift motion. In a sudden, abrupt motion, he flung it onto the counter, the metal ringing against the surface. "This is a mistake," he said, his voice icy and barely above a whisper. Dorian remained utterly unperturbed. "I'm willing to embrace the uncertainty." And just like that, it came to an end. Heather marched to the back, grumbling softly, while Tucker trailed closely, his expression still contorted with disbelief and bitterness. Eric paused briefly, as if words were on the tip of his tongue, but ultimately he merely shook his head and followed behind them with a heavy step. And then it was only Janelle. She remained rooted to the spot, her heart pounding fiercely, observing the individuals who had once ridiculed her, belittled her, and made her feel insignificant, leaving with empty hands. Dorian glanced over his shoulder at her, his face a mask of mystery. "Are you still here with me?" Janelle exhaled slowly, her head shaking in disbelief. "I'm at a loss for words." "Just say yes," Dorian stated plainly. Janelle took a deep breath. "What if I decline?" "Then I'll find someone else," Dorian said with a casual air. "But I'd rather not." With sincerity in his voice, he continued, "I truly meant what I said. I need someone I can trust," as he held her gaze firmly. "I have faith in you." Janelle sensed a constriction in her chest. For years, she had been trapped in this place, observing those undeserving rise to success, while she toiled relentlessly, merely striving to make ends meet. At this moment, she found herself with the opportunity to transform everything, to enhance this environment. More just, a measured, resolute breath filled her lungs. She extended her hand, deftly lifting the keyring from the counter, the cool weight of it resting comfortably in her palm. She wrapped her fingers around it. She raised her chin, squared her shoulders, and confronted Dorian's gaze directly. "I will take care of it." Dorian gave a single nod, content with the outcome. "Excellent," he remarked. "Commence immediately." Janelle clenched the keyring, the cool weight pressing into her palm, a concrete reminder that her life had shifted in a heartbeat. Just hours ago, she had exited this building, feeling humiliated, without a job, and consumed by desperation. Now she stood in the same spot, but with an undeniable strength, something none of them had ever imagined she would possess. The identical diner, the identical walls, the identical tables. Yet, there was an unmistakable shift in the air. The atmosphere felt charged with the lingering intensity of recent events. The atmosphere in the room was changing in a manner she hadn't completely grasped yet. Dorian observed her intently, allowing her the space to come to terms with the gravity of her recent decision. She inhaled deeply, finding her balance. "I begin now," she echoed, striving to make her voice sound more powerful than she truly felt. Dorian nodded, his expression resolute. At this moment, Janelle let out a quick breath, shoving the torrent of feelings to the back of her mind. There was no moment to linger and reflect. Tasks awaited completion. She surveyed the vacant diner, the aroma of coffee and grease lingering heavily, the partially clean tables serving as a stark reminder that her inaugural role as manager would present its challenges. The environment was chaotic, both in its physical state and in every other aspect. The diner operated on a foundation of bias, complacency, and an unspoken hierarchy that dictated worth and significance. That has come to an end. She glanced over her shoulder at Dorian. "I operate without a team." Dorian's lips curled gently, a spark of mischief dancing in his gaze. "Absolutely not." Janelle let out a sound that resembled a laugh, shaking her head in disbelief. "What am I meant to do now? Manage the entire establishment on my own?" Dorian rested against the counter, observing her intently, gauging her reaction. "Please share your thoughts." Janelle paused, uncertainty flickering in her mind. She had no intention of being untruthful. A part of her lingered in uncertainty, sensing that she was about to embark on a journey far beyond her current grasp. Yet, that aspect of her had erred in the past. The individuals who were once employed here, they had mocked her, belittled her, made her feel as if she were worth less than nothing. Yet, she was the one who had kept this place intact. She was the one truly putting in the effort. And now she found herself in this very moment. She aligned her posture. "I require additional personnel. Individuals who genuinely show concern." Dorian gave a slight nod. "The responsibility lies with you now." Janelle gnawed at the inside of her cheek, lost in thought. She understood the type of individuals she desired in this space. Employees who grasped the essence of respect. Who could resist playing the same games that Heather and Tucker had enjoyed. who failed to determine who was worthy of quality service, and who hasn't. Locating them was the challenge. Suddenly, it dawned on her. She was certain of her starting point. Just one day, she requested. Dorian arched an eyebrow. A single day. Janelle acknowledged with a nod. By tomorrow morning, I will have a complete team in place. Dorian emitted a soft laugh, clearly fascinated by her self-assurance. Yet he chose not to probe further. Instead, he stepped back from the counter, sweeping away unseen particles from his sleeves. Okay, Janelle, you have one day. He moved toward the door, but then he hesitated, pivoting to look at her once more. His expression changed subtly, a weightier demeanor taking hold of his features. He added one more thing. The vision for this diner begins here and now, shaping it into whatever you desire. Not tomorrow, not the following week. At this moment, the atmosphere is yours to create. You take the reins of how everything unfolds. Take charge and make it happen yourself. Janelle locked eyes with him, the gravity of his words embedding themselves profoundly within her. This belonged to her now. More than merely the title. More than merely a position. The ability to create something unique. She gave a single nod. I comprehend. Dorian observed her for a brief moment, then, seemingly content, offered a subtle nod before exiting, leaving her solitary in the diner. The following morning, Janelle entered Harbor's diner just before dawn, the chilly air nipping at her skin. She had hardly closed her eyes, yet fatigue was irrelevant at this moment. She had assured Dorian of a complete team, and she dedicated every moment of the night to ensure she would fulfill that promise. As she swung the door wide, the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee enveloped her immediately. The diner was hushed, slowly stirring from slumber. Yet there was an unmistakable change, as if the very essence of its being had transformed while the world slept. At that moment, her gaze fell upon them. The team she has recently joined. She devoted countless hours to contacting individuals, reaching out to those she believed would grasp the vision for what this place could become. Some were previous colleagues from earlier positions, individuals who had been sidelined for the same reasons she had nearly faced. Some were youthful individuals seeking their initial genuine employment, anxious yet enthusiastic. A handful were individuals she had encountered through community efforts, those who had previously been disregarded but simply required an opportunity. And now they found themselves before her, anticipating. Janelle inhaled deeply, moving ahead with determination. Very well, she stated, her voice unwavering. To begin with, my approach is distinctly different from my predecessors. If you're here to decide who deserves respect and who doesn't, it's best to go now. Silence enveloped the scene, and not a single soul stirred. Well, she remarked, as that time has come to an end. She surveyed the diner, recalling the countless evenings she had lingered here, observing individuals like Heather and Tucker allowing patrons to overstay their welcome without attention, witnessing Raymond's indifference, aware that her hands were tied. Yet at this moment she was able to. Here's the situation, she went on. We are managing this establishment with the utmost integrity. Every customer holds significance. It's irrelevant what they don or how they appear. Upon entering that door, they are met with respect. That's it. A handful of heads bobbed in acknowledgement, soft whispers of consensus flowing among the assembly. Janelle locked eyes with each of them, conveying her seriousness without a word. Your dedication is commendable, and I'm here to support you. However, if I observe anyone engaging in the same behavior as the previous team, your time here will be limited. Stillness. Then one of the new hires, Maya, a woman in her early 20s, lifted her chin and declared with conviction, "That's precisely the kind of place I aspire to work in." A handful of others whispered their assent, nodding in unison. Janelle experienced a gentle, unwavering warmth enveloping her chest. After 3 long years, she found herself thriving in this diner, no longer merely existing. She was at the forefront of it. As the lunch rush surged hours later, Janelle positioned herself behind the counter, observing the scene with keen interest. Their new team was finding its rhythm, the lively chatter and the gentle clinking of dishes creating a vibrant atmosphere. The atmosphere felt distinct, more buoyant, inviting, and just clients who had previously been overlooked or regarded as a nuisance were now receiving attentive service infused with authentic care and respect. The atmosphere in the diner transformed, as if it had inhaled a revitalizing breeze, casting aside years of negativity in a mere moment. Suddenly, the bell above the door chimed softly. Janelle pivoted with a natural grace, prepared to welcome the newcomer. A man entered the room, accompanied by a small girl who appeared to be around 6 years old. He appeared fatigued yet well put together, his hands rugged and calloused, embodying the essence of a laborer, likely just returning from a long shift. The young girl grasped his hand firmly, her large brown eyes darting around the room, as though she were attempting to determine whether they had a place in this space. Janelle immediately identified that expression. It was the identical expression Dorian wore when he entered the room just the previous night, the expression of someone preparing for letdown. For far too long, individuals such as him, much like her own father before his passing, had been regarded as mere afterthoughts in environments like this. Not today. Janelle picked up a menu, navigated around the counter, and approached with a smile that was both inviting and effortless. "Welcome to Harbor's Diner," she remarked. "Is it just the two of you today?" The man blinked, seemingly taken aback by being addressed first. He nodded in response. "Indeed, ma'am," he replied. "It's just my daughter and I." Janelle looked down at the small child, who was partially concealed behind her father's leg. Her lips curved into a smile. "What do they call you, darling?" The girl paused, her voice barely above a whisper as she responded. "Mia." Janelle leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, as if revealing a hidden truth. "Well, Mia, I serve the finest chocolate chip pancakes in Memphis. Do you believe you can manage that?" Mia's expression brightened as she nodded with excitement. Janelle adjusted her posture. "Very well, then. Come along. I'll help you both find a great spot to sit." As she guided them to a booth, she sensed the attentive gaze of her staff, her team, her people. They weren't merely observing a customer receiving fair treatment. They were sensing the transformation in the atmosphere, the alteration in the established practices. Janelle had transcended her role as a mere waitress, shedding the identity of a disposable employee who was expected to remain silent and conform to the status quo. She had taken charge and was establishing the guidelines now. She was determined not to let that opportunity slip away.